So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Bonjour. Thank you so much for joining us in Geneva at UNITAR headquarters, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. I have the pleasure to be your moderator today. And this is a very important side event organized by the UNITAR Division for Peace. And the topic of this meeting will focus on peace, of course, peace for Sahel. Before starting and having the pleasure to introduce you the different speakers and experts that will be here with us in the discussion online and here in Geneva for the discussion, I would like to kindly advise you to raise your virtual hand in case you need to get the floor to ask a question. Before the time where we will take your questions, you will be able to write your questions in the chat box that is below your screen. Below your screen, you have also the opportunity to listen to the different exchanges between the experts in English, French, and Spanish. But before I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce you to the director of the Division for Peace, Mr. Évariste Karambisi. Mr. Karambisi, the floor is yours for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Catherine. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Executive Director of the United Nations Institute of Training and Research, UNITAR, let me start by thanking our distinguished guests for your participation in our hybrid conference, which marks the UNITAR Division for Peace Advisory Board side event, which questions the possibility of return of peace in the Sahel. After more than 10 years of conflicts and countering terrorism in the Sahel is living in instability, putting thousands of civilians at risk, causing massive suffering, and forcing millions of people to flee and leave their homes. The humanitarian situation is extremely concerning, and security challenges reach unprecedented levels. At the root of this situation, multidimensional challenges combine a complex interaction which increase the instability in the Sahel. Poverty and subsequent inequality, a weak governance, a low level of trust in the government, and a precedented lack of justice, along with regular human rights violations committed by national security forces and armed forces of the trigger radicalization and further fuel violence. The Sahel had endured 10 years more of violence, which threatened to spread geographically to other countries such as Togo, Benin, or Cameroon. This continued crisis and propagation of violence now seriously slows down and undermines the achievement of all sustainable development goals in the region. So here's the question. Can peace return to Sahel? There are numerous areas for improvement, and the discussions also serves to highlight that the Sahel is a region of opportunities, which is key to Africa's development aspirations. Given the intricate sources of conflicts and the concerning humanitarian emergency, the window for a sustainable action to prevent the spread of violence to other regions and countries and to respond to the current challenges is now. This event or conference aims at giving visibility to the Sahel in the dense international context and at improving the understanding of the driven of the conflict, counter and stop the spread of violence, and at identifying long-term recommendations for future initiatives towards peace in the important region. Without peace, we all know that there is no democracy. Without peace, there is no development. Without peace, there is no sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, as a specialized training agency of the United Nations system, UNITAR is committed to supporting individuals and governmental and non-governmental organizations at all levels by enhancing their capacity through the delivery of customized learning solutions. In these challenging times, this flexibility and the careful attention to the specific needs of our partners and beneficiaries is more important than ever. I look forward to hearing your views and ground and the experience that will shape, inform, and influence promoting peace in the Sahel. Again, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much to the Director of the Peace Division of UNITAR, Mr. Évariste Karambizi. Without further ado, I will introduce the different experts that are with us this afternoon here in Geneva and a bit everywhere in the world. I'm going to turn to the lady because we have the pleasure to have a lady with us, Miss Tanya Mehra, who is Senior Research Fellow and Program Lead for the Rule of Law Responses to Terrorism at the International Center for Counterterrorism in The Hague, in the Netherlands. Madam, good afternoon, and happy to have you with us. We also have Mr. Ahmedou Ould Abdallah, President of the Center 4S and former United Nations Special Envoy in Sudan and former Special Representative of the Secretary General in Burundi, Somalia, and head of the United Nations Office for West Africa. Sir, thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you among us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. We also have Mr. Fabrizio Lobasso, Sub-Saharan Africa Deputy Director for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and Adjunct Professor of Economic Diplomacy, Soft Power and Country System, UNITAR in Rome, Italy. Professor Fabrizio Lobasso, bienvenue, welcome.
Good afternoon, thank you.
Thank you. And we have also the pleasure to have Mr. Abdul Kasim Famba, who is the National Coordinator of Think Peace Sahel. Monsieur, bienvenue, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to see you all connected with us this afternoon. As the director of the Division for Peace of UNITAR, Mr. Karambizi, did mention, the situation in Sahel is very serious. And the question that we are asking this afternoon is, can peace ever return to the Sahel? We will hear from you, from your expertise. We will hear, maybe you will share with us the different lessons you've learned by following the situation in the field, by exchanging with the different entities that are implicated in what's happening in the Sahel. But before everything, before entering really in the discussion, I will address you a question. After more than 10 years of conflict and violence, what is your respective overall assessment of the situation in the Sahel and of the root causes of the conflict? I know that it's a very broad question, but I will ask you to try to summarize about what you have to say on the situation in that region. So I will first give the floor to the lady, Madame Tanya Mera. The floor is yours. Could you please share with us your impressions and your conclusions? You have to, yeah, good, perfect. We hear you.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you at this event, in a very important event. And I'm very glad to participate and share some perspectives, mainly focused on the rule of law and human rights deficits which we see in the Sahel. I think it's not only one of the drivers for radicalization to violent extremism, but I also strongly believe that it is time to refocus and double our efforts to achieve long-term peace and justice in the Sahel. So my name is Tanya Mera, and I'm a senior researcher at the International Center for Counterterrorism in The Hague. And we have a global portfolio, if you can say it like that, and we focus on both the prevention side of violent extremism. We also look at current and emerging trends, and the pillar that I'm responsible for at ICCT looks at the rule of law responses to terrorism. So while the total number of deaths due to terrorism has dropped worldwide, we do see a different picture in Africa. And the Sahel region is now the epicenter of terrorism, with the Sahel accounting for more terrorism deaths in 2022 than both South Asia and the Middle East and Northern Africa combined. The deaths in the Sahel have constituted 43% of the global total in 2022, compared to just 1% in 2007. So we see a dramatic increase in the number of terrorist attacks. The increase of terrorism is coupled and complicated further with the democratic backsliding, which we see in the last couple of years. We have seen since 2021, 6 attempted coups, out of which 4 were successful. The underlying drivers are complex and systematic and range to poor water, lack of food, ethnic polarization, but I also believe the lack of a good functioning criminal justice system. So let's zoom out a little bit, and then we can clearly see that the vast majority of terrorist attacks which actually occur in the context of an armed conflict. In fact, 80% of all the attacks and 90% of the deadly attacks in 2022 take place in countries in conflict. And we see a similar pattern in the Sahel. What we also see is that the attacks in these countries involved in conflict are far more deadlier than in peaceful countries. A further worrying development is that following the example of Mali, we see more countries throughout the region are cutting ties with European forces and instead are relying on the Russian private military contractor, also known as the Wagner Group. So despite the fact that most of these terrorist attacks occur during an armed conflict, we do see an exceptional expansion of legal frameworks across other continents, but also in Africa. And they allow broad-reaching anti-terrorism laws, whereby international humanitarian law is often ignored. International humanitarian law, also referred to as the law of armed conflict, is in fact the applicable legal framework in these cases. So what we see is that a number of states tend to either underclassify or overclassify conflicts. An example of overclassification is where states respond by applying a military instead of a law enforcement framework, which also provides them a different set of rules when use of force can be applied. But what we also see, and which is far more common, is that states underclassify armed conflicts. And this means that you see, in these cases, you see that states designate non-state armed groups as terrorist groups and try to prosecute them under strict terrorism legislation. And they often lack any exceptions for the existence of an armed conflict. Now, in addition to the absence of clear definitions of terrorism, it does enable oppressive regimes, not only in the Sahel, but also in other countries, to label political opposition or minority groups engaged in non-violent or violent acts as terrorist, and to apply a very securitized counterterrorism response. So denying the existence of an armed conflict has consequences. First of all, during an armed conflict, not all acts of violence are prohibited. Whereas under terrorism laws, all acts of violence are prohibited. The principle of distinction under international humanitarian law determines that combatants and military objectives can be targeted, whereas civilians and civilian objectives are protected. Now, the second consequence is that it reduces the incentives for such groups to actually comply with international humanitarian law, since they are treated as terrorists, regardless whether they respect international humanitarian law, such as protecting civilians, or violate it and commit war crimes. So what we see as a result when states are focusing only on terrorism, that this can go at the expense of the more serious offenses that are being committed, which includes war crimes or crimes against humanity. And they are therefore also denying justice to victims. So if we look to one specific crime, or I would say a range of crimes, I would like to zoom in a little bit on sexual and gender-based violence crimes that are being committed in the Sahel. And these are not only being committed by terrorist groups, non-state armed groups, but also in some instances by the Wagner Group and armed forces. So sexual and gender-based violence crimes is a very broad category. It includes the systematic use of rape, sexual slavery, abductions, forced pregnancy, and other forms of physical and mental abuse. Now, in general, women and girls are significantly more targeted than men and boys, but we should not overlook the fact that sexual gender-based violence crimes are also committed against young boys and young men. So what we see is that human rights abuses, when they are committed by the military, it even further complicates the situation. There has indeed been a trend toward providing more training to security forces, and often they are being supported by foreign or external states who are seeking to increase the trainings for the military. But nevertheless, we do see that there is not yet a strong enough focus on human rights and rule of law in these trainings. And in fact, in some cases, the involvement of the military in counterterrorism context has worsened and led to the widespread problem of lack of accountability. And that basically feeds into the assumption that there is a culture of impunity, and that undermines the trust of the general public in the government to provide security and justice, and can, in fact, also further increase radicalization towards terrorist groups. And this is one of the narratives which is also being exploited and used by terrorist groups. So when you look at sexual and gender-based violence crime, these crimes leave deep scars and are not being prosecuted in the Sahel region sufficiently. And what we see is that victims are afraid to come forward out of fear of retaliation. But what we also see that there is a lack of an appropriate legal framework. So sexual and gender-based violence crimes can be prosecuted on the basis of domestic laws. But then we have to make sure that the domestic laws do not have a very narrow definition of sexual and gender-based violence crimes, whereby they would, for example, only consider rape and not any other form of sexual gender-based violence crimes a crime under their domestic laws. And also other discriminatory limitations in the law would need to be addressed. For example, that there's a time limit to file a complaint or other kind of legal impediments needs to be addressed. For example, access to the courts for some of these victims. Sexual and gender-based violence crimes can also be prosecuted potentially as terrorist offenses. We see actually only one example in Tunisia where it has been mentioned as one of the terrorist offenses. We do not see it included in other countries. And finally, when sexual gender-based violence crimes are being committed at such a large scale, they may qualify as war crimes or as crimes against humanity. And this would allow to prosecute them as a core international crimes. So I am aware that several countries in the Sahel have ratified the Rome Statute, but may not all of them have implemented it in their domestic legislation. But countries can rely also on the Geneva Conventions, which are now part of customary international law, or on the Torture Convention. So they are basically, through different legal frameworks, one could explore the prosecution of sexual gender-based violence crimes. But more is needed than just only a proper legal framework. It would require intensive training for the law enforcement and prosecutors how to deal with victims of sexual and gender-based violence crimes, especially when they are also minors. And the aim would be to prevent re-traumatization and learning how to question victims of such crimes. So I will conclude here because I know we started much later than intended, and I do not want to take too much time away from the other panelists. I think when impunity prevails, it's not only denying justice to victims, but it's also creating a permissive climate that serious violations will not be prosecuted and in effect will erode the trust of the general public in the criminal justice system to fairly dispense justice. It is important to invest in strong and independent justice systems, but also to ensure more oversight of state security actors by independent civilian-led bodies with clear accountability and sanctions for abuse to fundamentally address and end impunity. I believe that these are essential factors if you want to create a long-lasting peace and justice in the Sahel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Mera, for your all these elements, your expertise. It is, on the one hand, it is a bit frightening when you talk about all the facts, but they're huge challenges, but we know that we have the tools in order to change the situation. And as you mentioned, prevention is very important. Intensive training also is important, but also stop impunity, put accountability on top of the list. It is important that the countries that are hit by poverty, by hunger, by all the lack of basic services, unemployment, have also that opportunity to see a little light at the end of the tunnel of violence. I would like now to kindly ask Mr. Hamidou Ould Abdallah, who is the president of the Center for S, to share with us his experience and also give us his opinion about what happened, his analysis on what happened the last 10 years in the Sahel region. Sir, I don't see. Okay, I hear you. Good.
Thank you very much. And once again, my apologies. I have not been able to connect to the video, essentially because I'm not good at technology. And sorry, but I appreciate your invitation, participation, and especially you, Chairwoman, the way you are starting the meeting. I would like to briefly make a number of observations, a few observations. First, what the Sahel is. The Sahel is this region going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, probably stopping mid-Chad. But for easy understanding, it is a Sahelian bound from Atlantic to the Red Sea, separating North Africa from Equatorial Africa, not Sub-Saharan Africa, from Equatorial Africa, because I served in Kenya. It is an other. Africa is a huge, going from my place in West Africa to Nairobi is twice going from my place to Paris, which is 10 hours instead of 5. So this is the Sahel, a band from north and savannah, and mostly desertic. And trade for centuries has been north, south, south, north, not transversal. And today, this region has been unstable due to a number of considerations. The first is the climate in the 70s, severe droughts, which pushed to movement of population within countries and between countries. Second, the fast-growing urbanization, because the drought, because some aspect of short-term demography, there was vast movement from population to the capital city. And that is very important. Going to the capital city means you become independent from your communities, tribal system, or more or less. And this is why this youth and others feel more independent. So climate change, fast-growing urbanization, demography, added to the severe economic difficulties, which I will not blame on international organization only or an assistance, but on all partners, including our own government, has pushed to a number of things. Corruption, retribalization. Instead of having countries trying to be national, we retribalize, and this is from my experience in Somalia, a country where, I mean, unique in Africa and probably in Asia, where all population speaks the same language, has the same religion, that they have been at war since 1992, whatever for Islamists or the reason for Muslim or the reason they are all Muslim. So this is the Sahel, a region traditionally of trade, exchange, north, east, south, east-west, and north-south. And today, with the drought, with the fast-growing urbanization, with the rapid demography, with some disputable governance, with weak international assistance or symbolic, between brackets, if you compare, and I'm not blaming, but if you compare massive support to Ukraine, which is absolutely to understand, there is a difference. And here we are in a region with terrorists funded originally from our side, and more for the last few years on illegal activities, drug, utilization of migration. It is becoming like this structural crisis. We are not African. The first structural crisis, you all know it, is Afghanistan. Second is Colombia. You know, for years, they feed each crisis fitting itself by drug or by traffic and so on. And terrorism has developed. When I was a student, which makes me old if I tell you when, the terrorism were the Tupamaros in Latin America, or the Red Brigade in Germany, or in Italy, or Band Abader in Germany. Now we have terrorists in our countries linked to, my opinion, more governance than international Islamism. So, and they are dangerous in a sense that they are increasingly better governed and facing weaker governance. They are able to support and their opinion and defend their opinion because the weakness or weaknesses of government in remote areas. So the retribalization of a system to support that or that regime is helping them to use it to get funding through drug trafficking of cigarettes and migration, because the custom or police or gendarmerie, if they are from their tribe, they would not arrest them. So this makes it very serious, a structural crisis. And when I say structural, it is compared to conjunctural, that it is not something of a season, but seems to be more and more deeply embedded in the system, in the structure of the countries, and it is leading to, the crisis feeding itself on the crisis, on weaknesses or deficits of government are stronger. And this is where we are very concerned. And the last paper my center, we published yesterday, the Center for S, which means Strategy, Security, Sahel, Sahara, they are getting informal funding through non-organized exploitation of minerals. So it is not only trafficking cigarettes or migration or drugs, but increasingly the informal exploitation of huge resources and easy to connect, relatively easy, because there is a risk of using mercure mineral to separate gold from rock is very dangerous for environment, for people. And many, those who follow the region, from time to time, you have people who die because the well fell on them and so on. So overall, thank you for organizing a meeting to address this situation in the Sahel. Again, it is not in Africa, it's the Sahel. Africa is a huge continent. You have terrorism maybe in Mozambique, in Somalia, but I'm talking only the Sahel, from very serious for the region, serious for our partners, especially European and American, and very serious because people concerned are used to austerity. They are able to spend a lot of time without having the best food or even food, or the best clean water, or not even water. And unless, and I will conclude on it, there is a continued amelioration of the governance and increased cooperation, like supporting the G5 Sahel, which is a group of 5 countries, my country, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad. And for almost 1 year now, Mali has withdrawn, but it is possible it return. So this G4-5 needs a kind of diplomatic support to convince them that it is good to be better organized than disorganized, and to address this problem, starting by local structural reform, amelioration of government, less clanism, and leading to reinforcing the institution, making them more open. And thank you very much. I think it is timely, and I hope your contribution will be understood and accepted. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmedou Ould Abdallah, for your inputs. Very interesting. And thank you for reminding us how broad the Sahel region is. It helps us better understand the problems and challenges that this region is facing. You spoke also about the list of the numbers of reasons like climate change, and the movements of populations, migration, corruption, terrorism, trafficking. And it's true that there is a very weak international assistance for many years. But as it has been mentioned yesterday in New York by the Secretary General of UN, Antonio Guterres, during the Countering Terrorism and Preventing Violent Extremism event, it is true that now we see across Africa that there are more and more collaboration. There is more and more collaboration and cooperation, joint efforts made in the Sahel, in the Lake Chad Basin, in Mozambique, and all the different regions. And we see now the determination of African leaders to tackle this evolving threats. But I will now give the floor to the gentleman who is sitting in Rome, Fabrizio Lobasso, who is the Sub-Saharan Africa Deputy Director for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Mr. Lobasso, what can you tell us about what you've witnessed in that region and the work that you are doing there? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you to all kind participants and researchers and experts. I will start by 3 simple words: civil society, communication, institutional building. These are probably the 3 pillars in which Italy, the international community, Europe, are working the most in the area, and probably are the most important keys in order to go on with this so complex confrontation in the area. Civil society, military and security tools and methods are fundamental. We are talking about an enemy, a very well-organized enemy, and obviously we need countermeasures, but it's not enough. Human being-centered policies, people-to-people initiatives, basic needs, human needs and community help. This is what people from the area ask. This is what they need in order to be allied, strong allied, to the fight against aversive extremism and radicalism. This is something that Italy and Europe in particular are doing very well. For example, in the dimension of the Africa Focus Group, which is the African branch of the anti-Daesh global coalition, which is working very well, and it's combining measures concerning security as biometrics, border control, battlefield evidence, and juridical tools, but it's also combining with other issues, which is initiatives, solidarity initiatives, development cooperation initiatives, empowerment of vulnerable people in the areas, starting from those countries in which we can perform the better. That at this moment, among the 5 of the Sahel, I would say Niger and Mauritania at the first site, and then obviously all the others. So civil society at the center of our heart, at the center of our idea. It's a new humanism, and people there are looking for our help, and for sure, speaking with people in the area, they are not absolutely keen on launching themselves into the arms of other countries or other interlocutors that have aversive agendas, hidden agendas, which we don't share as part of the world. Communication, strategic communication, is like we say, just in jargon, stratcom. Radicalism, especially ideological, religious radicalism, sometimes has as a flag Islam. Islam is peace. Islam is a fantastic demonstration of inclusion, of solidarity, of resilience, of charity. And the fact that most of those groups of extremism, they claim to be Muslims, and then they contradict 100% the precepts of the Quran and Sunnah, is something which is a scandal. But our task is to make it emerge as a big contradiction, as well as narrative and stratcom is one of the tools that extremist groups they use. Our task, as for example, a good experience that I had as ambassador to Sudan in 2015, 2019, was through, for example, the Sufi Brotherhood, that at a certain moment they started to highlight the contradiction and the paradox of talking about Islam and then gaining money on drug, on prostitution, on criminality, on violence. All that is absolutely contradicted and denied by the Quran and the Sunnah. So let's work on communication. Let's work on people. Let's find a good words and a new way of communicate, a new narrative that can reach young people, youth, women, and not only policymakers and decision makers. Third and last, institutional building. We're talking about sometimes states that are bigger twice, 3 times Italy or France or Germany. We're talking about a state that sometimes is completely absent, sometimes is not organized, sometimes is corrupted. Whatever the case, whatever the chance, we have and we may work with our experience in terms of institutional buildings on how to administrate with ethics, with effectiveness. It is something that we may find into the emerging young directive classes of those countries and in Africa. So institutional building is not an impossible task. On the contrary, it's something we have to concentrate, because if we have voids, the voids will be fulfilled by somebody else. And we have to care of the human basic needs of the people, because if you don't eat, if you don't have to sustain yourself, to support your family, obviously you launch yourself into other arms, which at least gives you the basic needs you need to survive. And this is something that fortunately has been understood. So it's not only a security and military battle over there. It's a social battle. It's a value battle. But it's not a question of exporting external values into the Sahel. It's a confrontation. It's an egalitarian dialogue. It's an intercultural dialogue in order to look for progressive synthesis in value, interpretation, and the way we have to find hand in hand to win this battle. So this is, for my part, maybe it's also my nature, it's an optimist message that I can give. It's a long-lasting battle. It's a very harsh one. The enemy is incredibly organized, probably sometimes committed and mixed and melanged into the institutions, but it's not an impossible battle. And the international community is ready and keen, and Italy on the front line with other countries, as I said, for the African Focus Group, which is chaired by Italy, United States, Niger, and Morocco. We may win this battle. It will be a long-lasting one, but we are there for help. But the secret is understanding the perspective of African friends. Without this intercultural efforts, in order to include the perspective of the Africans and how our African friends think about even simplest value, it is not a complete battle. This is the secret, and we are going to do our best to proceed and to go on until the moment, whatever it takes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fabrizio Lobasso. I remember that you are the Sub-Saharan Africa Deputy Director for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. And thank you for presenting us this range of measures combining security with the solidarity initiatives in the region and for these very positive thoughts that give us hope that all together we can win the battle. I now turn to our last high-level guest, Mr. Abdul Kasim Fomba, who's the national coordinator of Think Peace Sahel. We are now listening to you, and I hope that you too will share with us a bit of hope through your expertise. Mr. Fomba.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. It's a really opportunity and a pleasure to be here. And I think there is a lot of summary of the situation in the Sahel has been made by some of my predecessors with action. So I will maybe focus on specific cases in Mali with action with the ex-combatant and ex-detainees. And but before that, I must set the scene for the crisis in Mali, so everybody can understand more. So the crisis that has taken place in Mali since 2012 is the result of an insurgency by so-called Salafist jihadists and pro-Azawad independence groups, combined with the mismanagement of the state, causing the huge social crisis we saw at 2020. If in 2012, it was perceived that the conflict only concerned the north of Mali, it's now undeniable that the center has become the epicenter. Knowing that at the beginning of the crisis, Fulanis from Haire and Sino, that is in the east of Mopti, has joined the movement for unity and jihad, the Mujao, and in West Africa, with the sole purpose of defending themselves against the Dogon and Tuareg, with from conflict were multiplying. It is important to note, however, that the spiral of violence in the following years is linked to the first attack of these terrorist groups in 2015 in the center. Waves of communal violence flared up toward the beginning of 2018 in the circle of Koro and Bankas, with clashes between armed Fulani and Dogon group that left dozens dead in a few days. We have three underground factors contribute to the explosion of the region. The first one is the global warming, which has disrupted the transhumance routes. So it's important to know that the Fulanis are mainly herders. And the second is the demography, which has increased the pressure on the land, and the majority of the Dogon are often farmers. And the proliferation of small arms is the submachine guns. The submachine gun was sold at 300 euros on the black market in Mopti at the time. So everybody can access to these armies at this moment. And the last one is the arrival of Islamist terrorist groups who has undermined the traditional justice system that has previously diffused inter-communal conflicts. And the community violence escalated with perception of persecution between members of different communities. And I say this Dogon, with those from Dan Ambasagu, which are suspected at several massacres against Poles, and also several Dogon civilians are suspected as having been killed by Fulanis. So in the sense also there is like discontent which is growing against the government and the international states, the international forces. and tens of thousands of people demonstrated in Bamako at the call of an imam and like religious leaders and some political leaders and civil society leaders to denounce the security and social problems. And this led to the weakening of President Ibeka regime and his downfall with his forced resignation in August 2020, leading the country into a phase of political transition with the transitional President Bandao and the transitional Prime Minister Mokhtar, who were eventually called to account, giving the reign of the transition to his former Vice President, which is now the Colonel Assimi Goïta. In addition, the break between the Al-Qaeda-linked group, the Soutien al-Islam or Musulman, and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, which went to open war after several years of peaceful coexistence with them. And the state decided to break its relationship after that of military collaboration, then to the development with France, reinforcing more its link with and reinforcing more its link with Russia, with which it equipped itself strongly in armament. So I have two maps here, but it's maybe I'm not projecting my presentation, but I have two maps here. One of the maps is from January 2022, and one is from January 2023. And the difference we have, like there is criminal incidents are spreading across the country. And we saw that in 2020, in January 2020, most of the incident was in the center. And now in 2023, there is along of the country, a lot of incidents in the country. So, and also I have a map to give some position of terrorist groups in the Liptako countries, and I'm talking about Mali, Burkina, and Niger. So maybe after the presentation, I can share it with you. And the focus I have on the presentation today is to decide to focus on ex-combatant, not registered to Mali DDR process, because Mali is on a process of DDR, and so there is a list of former combatants who are already involved in this DDR process. So the focus we have is all the ex-combatants which are not on the DDR process, and also your youth, that is youth and women of communities of intervention also who are engaged on our intervention. What is important to understand that it's a reason for some of the combatants why they leave the groups. And we did different assessment on the field with them to understand more why they are leaving the groups. And some of them is the lack of confederation from the communities they are fighting for. Most of them are saying that they integrate group to protect their own communities. And that is the first one. And the second is the lack of means to support themselves, because they are thinking to, when they integrate group, they will have a lot of money to take care of themselves and their family. And after moments of integration of group, they understand that it's not really true. And the need for labor for family needs also. And also some of them are saying that they are tired of city of fight they are seeing all time. And also some of them say that they are fear of the risk and dangers they face with armed groups when they integrated group and all the intervention of groups, attacks of groups they are doing in communities. And some of them are the marginalization of some member within the armed groups. You know, in the some of our countries, there is like a step of stratification of communities, and it exists also inside of these groups. One of them is the slow implementation of the peace and reconciliation agreement. It is the Mali government and some armed groups, CMA and Platform, they signed an agreement, a peace agreement, since 2015. And since 2015, they take a lot of time to implement all the continues of the peace agreement. So that is also one of the reasons, or for some of member groups also to leave their groups. And also the state one time promised of possible reinstatement in the army for some which are leaving their group. So most of them left their group, we're hoping that maybe they can integrate the armed group, but it's not the case for the moment. And following a wave of awareness raining about the danger of joining armed groups also, and spontaneous awareness of the issues involved in taking arms. We use three level of approach for the transformation process we have of the repentees. One of them is to include the collectivities and the National Commission, DDR, and also the national direction of the prison to the process, how to identify the people and to select the best people who are really former combatants. The second is the preparation of the communities, because most of the former combatants have difficult to reintegrate their own communities. And we prepare the communities to receive this as combatant, because we explain that can be like an actor of peace and an actor of changement. So it will be really important to prepare the communities to receive the ex-combatant doing or implementing activities on their own localities. And on the preparation phases also, we prepare also the ex-combatant that he can understand, because we train him and we reinforce him to understand that he can be an actor of change. Actually, we are working with 500 ex-former combatants on the field in Koro, Bankas, Ansongo, Menaka, and Gao. And with these 500 ex-combatants, we explain to them that they can be an actor of change in their own localities. It's real that they take arm against their communities, but now they can have like an opportunity to change all of that. And also on the reinforcement, we give awareness of their role they can have, and advocacy tools we give them to help them on the different tasks we give them on their own tasks they did on their communities. And the last one is the valorization of these actors, to see that they are really person who can change something. Donc the valorization went with the information, the reconstruction of infrastructure and economical support they have on the field. What is really important also to note that we understand that most of the detainees we listen, because we listen detainees, presumed terrorist detainees, we listen them all month in different prison in Mali. And we understand most of them have also psychic disorder. And this was new for us for this assessment we did. And this assessment is based on the post-traumatic disorder out of around 217 suspected. And we identify 5 types of disorder were observed with different level of severity. And you can find like one person with 3 or 4 types of disorder in his life. So with the approach, I noticed the 4 approach I noticed before, we have some results. The first one we we saw as result on the field is some representative of ex-combatant and ex-detainees visited like the local leaders, like the mayor of the community, to demonstrate the availability in the context of peace in the locality. That was at their own, and that is the first step. What we understand this was really interesting. The second is the handover of weapons. Most of them with the collaboration with a permanent secretary for the fight against the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and also other partner, local partner. And we understand that there is like a handover of a weapon at their own without any pressure. They went to give on the community, and that was really a positive thing we saw on our evaluation. And also there is like some ex-combatant who went to, like, there is like an assembly of communities, and they went to the assembly to for forgiveness, and they say that they take arms and they need that the community forgive them for all they did on the past. And what is really interesting, that it's the construction of infrastructure. And that was the main point, what is really interesting. They went to their own communities, and where there is like the infrastructure, they contribute to destroy. They work with the local community, youth and women of the communities to reconstruct the infrastructure they destroyed before. And that was really, really interesting. And also one of the results we understand was an interesting result is they are really involved to, I'm talking about the ex-combatant, in the demobilization of many of their comrades in armed groups. And that is really interesting as a result also we have on the field. And to finish with the recommendation, there is different recommendation we have with this implementation of project. The project is ongoing also, so that is first one is the advocacy to anticipate latent conflict prevention and fight against drugs, because we understand that drugs is doing a lot of destruction on youth in different localities. The second is the renovation and reconstruction of sites destroyed by ex-combatant and ex-detainee to continue to involve them on the reconstruction. The third is the creation of hope through training, reinforcement, and combatant and the assignment of community missions. We understand that ex-combatant and ex-detainee, they are people who were marginalized by the communities most of the time, and they need like to have like the hope and to have the assurance that they can change something in their communities, and it's important to involve them in this process of reconstruction of their communities and localities. And also it's important to continue anonymous disarmament of community members, because with the secretary I mentioned before, there is like a places, anonymous places you can go back and give your arms anonymously without any repression. And also to have a specific care for women and youth on the field, because they are the great and big act of change inside of their communities, and it's important to involve them with the other like ex-combatant and ex-detainee, to involve them, that because ex-combatant explain to the other youth of the localities that what is in the groups, what is the perception before to integrate the groups is not really the good perception they have to have. And one of the suggestions is to have a better investment of the various layers by especially the religious and community leaders. They have a lot of influence in their localities. It's really important also they can be involved. And to taking account also the real needs and expectation of young people and women drivers of change in all ongoing reform processes, so that they are more in line with their expectation. And that is really, really a key, this is really a key information, because actually in Mali, there is many reforms ongoing, and it's really important to take account the needs and expectation of youth and women inside. And to finish it, they revised the way the army intervenes in the field, because that is it's important that army has to be more closer and to be more responsive to the community, an army of proximity rather than an army of repression or perceived as aggression. That is really, really one of the lack of intervention we have on the army on the field. And the last one is the better operationalization of transitional justice and how to better create harmony with the Republican justice system. And yes, that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fomba. I mean, it was really, really interesting because with giving us all those details, you really showed us in a very close way the case of a country. And we better understood how it is possible that from one, I would say, small event, because we all know that the real deep roots of the crisis in Mali started in 2011 with the death of former leader Mohamed Gaddafi in Libya, and that you had step by step the consequences in Mali, and also the increase of violence in the different regions, Timbuktu, the circle of Mopti, the circle of Gao, and also it was very interesting to understand also the approach that is now needed, and that's the approach that you described. In fact, went back to what Mrs. Mera told us at the beginning of this event about the prevention and also the importance to involve and promote women in the DDR. I remind for those that don't know what DDR means, that it's disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. Very important. You spoke a lot about the former combatants, how the society should be prepared to forgive them, to re-accept them in society. And with all you said, maybe the most important element is the youth. The youth is the future of the country, and it is important for the youth to be totally implicated, but that their hopes, their needs should be taken into account when any institution, local, regional, international, tries to help and support the efforts of a country to go back to peace. So in this focus, I would like to ask you, what do you think could be the most urgent measure to be taken in order to maybe increase trainings or capacity building needs? We know that it's also, of course, linked to financial capacity. So I'll go back maybe to you, Mr. Fomba, and then I'll give the floor to Mr. Lobasso and to Madame Mera. So maybe Mr. Fomba, what are the needs? More training. You said it, that we need to better valorize, in fact, the actors, that you have to prepare the communities. So that needs training. Are there enough trainings?
No,
Thank you for the question. It's really interesting question, an important question also. For us, actually, the most urgent, because everything is urgent now in Mali, but I will say the most urgent for youth and these ex-combatants is training on leadership, training on how to be more engaged in the communities, and training to have like the opportunity of economical opportunities for us. That is the three main important training youth and the ex-combatant also have to be focused in the beginning. But there is also other information they need to have, because as I said, the Mali is on a process of reform, and in the process of the reform there is a lot of new document who has to be implemented by the communities themselves, and it's really important to that we find the way for the vulgarization of these document on the field, for the ownership of the document by the communities. You know the problem of the peace agreement we signed in 2015. The problem is the communities are not well informed about this peace agreement. So we are on 2023 and we are late on the execution of the peace agreement because the localities are not really informed. So it's really important when we have like an important document like that, on document like reform, that the people can take the ownership of this document. So to facilitate the reading of the document, this is really important. People are not, there is a lot of people who don't go to school. So it's really important to find the way we, sometimes we use, in Think Peace, we use pictures to explain some information, some document to the people that they more understand that. So there is like tools we can also bring to inform people on the reforms, on the peace agreement we have to execute, and different also document we have important, like the new constitution. Also, we are on a process of a new constitution in Mali, and a constitution is really one of the most important document on the life of a state. So it's really important that people has to be to take the ownership of the constitution, that there is no protestation against this constitution after, or people can give their own thinking about this constitution. So that can take account into the revise of the constitution when they will be on the CNT. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Fomba. Yes, it's true that in order for the population to better understand what the peace agreements are about, les accords d'Alger, ici from les accords d'Alger, I mean, they should understand. And it is true that it would be much easier to maybe translate the documents through radio shows, as they don't have access to newspapers, maybe in Bambara, in other local languages. And that's the reason why I turn also to Mr. Fabrizio Lobasso, who spoke about the importance of communication in his intervention. So what kind of trainings do you plan to organize in the Sahel region? Okay, you spoke about Mauritania, Niger. Do you have other plans? And are your plans stopped by some lack of finances? Do you need money? Because we know that most of the countries that are in crisis for many years are paying, if I can express myself like that, the consequences of the conflict in Ukraine, because most of the classic donors are now focusing on that conflict taking place in Europe. Mr. Lobasso.
Yes, thank you. Just to make a step back, I think that any kind of initiative on education, any kind of initiative on training and capacity building, we have to start from the very beginning. We have to start from the concept of identity. Because sometimes what I see is this lack of self-consciousness of lots of people I spoke with, of being full entitled to everything in this world, to every kind of education, and to reach any kind of goal and aim they may see and they may conceive in their mind. So we should work a lot on educational programs, but always having in mind that first of all, we have to help hand in hand to construct and to build the idea of a full and independent identity out of stereotypes, out of the past, out of post-colonization issues, out of foreign presence. And why I feel optimistic, because it's a wave of youth, a wave of young people that fortunately in the next 10 years will make disappear all kind of even the little remembrances of what they may be still, that kind of little piece of stone in shoes that we may find in a lot of African society in terms of relationship with foreign people, and especially from the Western country. So first of all, let's work on the identity. I can tell you that Italy, in the last 2-3 years, we have specialized a lot all over Africa with something that we understood it could be an incredible push for that.
We have a problem of connection, Mr. Fabrizio Lobasso.
I can hear. Can you hear me? I'm okay.
You are frozen through. Okay.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so I will give the floor to Mrs. Mera.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Sorry, I was saying Mr. Fabrizio was not yet done with his intervention.
No, that's okay. Can you feel me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes. No. I just was saying that, for example, one of the most important example that we are launching is electoral programs. In the hand, just to vote. The exercise of voting is very.
Do you hear me, sir? Excuse me, Mr. Lobasso, we had a small technical problem, and in fact, we did not hear the beginning, I'm sorry, of what you told us. So could you please tell us at the beginning? You said you were just saying that Italy had a very specific program and you were frozen.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Okay, just one word. Let's work on electoral training. Elections and votation is the most important sign and demonstration of the identity. One person, one vote. I vote, I exist. I vote, I have full identity of the side of the destiny of my country. This is something in which we are investing a lot all over Africa. Over.
Okay, so thank you. Madame Mera, at the beginning of this presentation and this discussion, you did speak about human rights. We know that human rights is the most important element here in order to be able to reach peace. We need for all of the population, all of the individuals to have access to basic human rights. And to the SDGs, the 17 goals of the United Nations. So I would like to know, as you mentioned at the beginning, that it was very important to have prevention, also accountability, also that it was important to provide and propose intensive trainings for prosecutors. What would you propose us? I have the impression that...
No, I can't hear you, unfortunately, so I can't hear the entire question, but I might make a wild guess. I mean, two things. One is it's not so much about having human rights. I think nobody's going to deny that. And indeed, one of them is, having a national identity. I fully agree with Fabrizio. The focus is more on the accountability, and it's not only about the accountability when it comes to prosecuting those who have committed crimes, but it is also holding the government accountable to having a justice system in place. And I think there, indeed, we should redouble our efforts and work together with prosecutors in these countries, not only at a national level, but also at a sub-regional level, so they can exchange good practices in how to collect evidence and how to prosecute these different crimes that are taking place. And there are differences in common law and civil law also in this region, and having these exchanges will help and improve these kind of accountability mechanisms. I would like to add that following up the previous two speakers on the role of education and youth, we have also at ICCT have been engaged in different kind of trainings for the youth. And I think what is important there is that it should also focus on media literacy and also on resilience, but also encouraging political participation of the youth, either like on an individual basis or through CSOs, that especially at local level, try to diversify the people who are taking part in the political processes. So there is not only one group or one ethnicity or one religion presented. So I think encouraging political participation at local level is very important, and also seeing how they can contribute to the development of CVE, countering violent extremists plans, that it is important to engage them in that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Meha. I would like to ask you also, what would be the best way to amplify the voice for non-violence? Because we feel that in all these countries, but we see it also not only in the Sahel. The Sahel is maybe one of the regions that has been hit for a long time by the climate change crisis and an accumulation of elements. But as you've just mentioned, it is very important to have the political participation on local levels of young people. We'll see it all over the world today. Demonstrations is because there's a problem of people that have the impression that they are left on the side. So, and they think that the only way to make their voice heard is through violence. So how could we advocate more and deeper for non-violence? I don't know which one of you. Oh, Madame Meha, I see you have maybe.
I don't have the magic bullet for this. I can only give you bits and pieces, and I trust the other panelists will hopefully also able to contribute to that. But I think it is to some extent what I have already said, that it is making sure that you have more inclusive governments and which represent different groups and minorities, and starting at local level. But I think it's also revisiting the social contract and working towards more that the general public has more trust in the government. And that means also strengthening the role of the government in providing security, in providing justice. From my line of work, that means it's focusing on justice systems. And it doesn't mean you only need to look at the traditional form of delivering justice. It certainly also includes looking at other forms and criminal justice mechanisms, and looking at other forms of justice under the transitional justice. So looking for memorialization and also other forms. So diversifying also what you mean with justice.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello? Yes.
sir. Yes, Mr. Ahmedou Ould Abdallah, with your very broad, experience and the work as a president of the Center 4S, I would like for you to give us more elements from the field. What are you doing? And as I've asked previously to the other experts, what is, according to you, the needs? Is there an increasing need of trainings and also capacity building needs? Maybe also building more opportunities for the Sahelian countries to participate to these kind of trainings and information. Could you please give us more insights?
Thank you. I think this is the right question, how to make progress. Thank you. My opinion, and from experience, the more a crisis lasts, the more it feeds on itself. You know, for how long? Maybe you are all young. For how long the crisis in Afghanistan has been? For how long the crisis in Yemen? For how long the crisis in Somalia? My point is, the more a crisis lasts, the more it feeds on itself, because partners have been helpful, but they started changing, not their approach, not their assistance, but personal changes. So the crisis feeds itself on its time. And unfortunately, in the Sahel, for instance, Mali crisis has been for a long time. This dimension is since 2011, but there are basic, unfortunately, in Mali since early 60s. Then the drought in Mali, then some rebellions. So, what to do to ensure that we can address properly, as you put it rightly? So my opinion is to try, and it is not easy, to have a common approach at regional level, not only national, but especially regional level, like with international cooperation. The 5 countries established the G5, the G5 partnership, like Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. For time being, Mali has withdrawn, but with good approach, it might join. So how to consolidate a common approach, a common response? Second, to think not only short, mid-term, to help to provide the humanitarian assistance, to help the weak people, especially women and children, but long-term, to try to have infrastructure, which is not easy when you have a crisis and attempt. But long-term priority for me is to encourage discussions and the dialogue between the parties, and especially government, to tell them whatever elected or not, it is their responsibility, it is their country. And I think exercises like this, if they are circulated to embassies or organizations active in the region, may help, because you all come from different background, different institutions, and it will help. So my conclusion on these points is to be patient, because there is no alternative, and to address the fundamental, which is more tolerance from local government, and to consolidate regional organization. I know some European countries are on the front line, Spain, but especially Italy, and how to support them to face a number of, I will not call it a threat, a number of difficulties they face, whatever migration, whatever drug trafficking, and other responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmedou Ould Abdallah. I remind our viewers that you're the president of the Center for S. Very interesting. Thank you. We know that some of you have to leave. I would like also to remind that UN, United Nations, is co-organizing with Nigeria the upcoming African Counterterrorism Summit. I believe it's going to take place during the month of July. So that when you speak about finding a certain harmonization among the countries that are hit by terrorism, it's interesting to see how the Africa is making a lot of efforts in fighting terrorism. And I remind also the viewers that the African Union has a roadmap to silence the guns by 2030. So it is quite interesting to know and to be aware that there are also regional, national, and initiatives on the level of the continent in order to react and to fight against those multiple ways of terrorism to sneak into societies all over the continent. Madam Mera, I know that you have to leave soon, so do you have in one or two sentences something to share with us before that we wrap up?
Before Madam Mera, maybe I can speak here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Famba.
Yeah, to have like a response of your question, it is really a good question. For me, the one is the listening of the communities, because instead we feel that sometimes the decisions are made without regard to what the small voices want. That's why most effort we are doing at the end is are failed. For me, beyond urgent humanitarian action, because there is like humanitarian action on some localities, we need to create the commitment. This is one of the most sustainable approaches, creating commitment inside of the communities, and specifically on youth and women also. And in my opinion, we need to create a sense of value for youth and women. The target actors must know that they are actors of change. When we listen to the young people of the village of Kaji Dar Salam, it's a village on the north of Mali in Gao region, we thought that the money was the first motivation, but it's not. They told us that the terrorists have made them responsible in their communities. So they need to be strengthened and accompanied by mission to other youth to transform their own communities. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mrs. Mehra?
Yeah, I think now you can hear me. Yes, thank you very much. No, I just wanted to follow up on what you said on the plans on silencing the guns in Africa, which is a huge target to be able to manage that by 2030. And I think what you see over the years is that the crime-terror nexus is very prevalent in different parts of Africa, including in the Sahel. The crime-terror nexus is, you really have to look at it through a regional lens, because how crime-terror nexus plays out in Europe or in Southeast Asia or in the Middle East is different than how it does in the Sahel. And there is an enormous surplus of weapons which are available, and you see a lot of diversion which is taking place. And you also see that guns are not only just used to carry out attacks, but evidence research has shown that the guns are also being used in a facilitative manner. But
Yes. If you could click again, because we don't hear you.
What I mean by that?
Yeah. You're back. Okay. You're back. You are back.
I'm back. Yeah. What I wanted to say is that you also see that guns are also being used in a facilitative manner. What I mean by that is that it is used for different forms of financing other forms of illicit trafficking. And it not only assists, like riding shotgun with weapons in exchange for money for drug traffickers or trafficking of natural resources. So the guns are more than just only a weapon to carry out attacks. It also is facilitating other forms of crime. And I think that is very important to also address. And I think maybe to conclude is that I think it is important to see the potential there is in the Sahel. It is a region which has vast amount of natural resources. It has the youth is one of the biggest strengths there. And I think we need to move away of looking at the situation and the terrorism only through a terrorism lens, but that we have to look at it more through a conflict prevention lens. And then we will be able to address the underlying grievances better. There are many, I agree, but we have to all, address them one by one from our areas of expertise. And in my case, it would be looking at the justice sector. But I think conflict prevention is crucial, and not only looking at it through a CT lens and trying to create a robust criminal justice mechanisms. And at the same time, focusing at local governance where you include the youths and increase political participation. I'll give the floor back to Fomba. I think he wanted to add something to what I've said.
Yes, thank you so much. Mr. Fomba. So could
now
you
are muted.
Unmute him? Could you please unmute Mr. Fomba?
Yes, I said that it was my first intervention, so I have the hand who was right. So.
Okay, thank you. So I'll give the floor now to Mr. Fabrizio Lobasso in Rome. Sir, do you have 1 or 2 sentences to share to wrap up this exchange today? We don't hear him. Okay, so I'll go back to Mr. Ahmedou Ould Abdallah. Sir.
Yes.
Vous avez la parole.
Merci. As I say, to wrap up, first, really to congratulate you as a chair, and this is not by courtesy, but the way you insist in asking the right question, and to thank the organizer, UNITAR and others. And I hope it is only a beginning of a process. What you are discussing is very useful because all the people have other priorities, which is normal. Whereas the Sahel situation is structural. It means really it is part of the situation. It is not like rainy season. It is not like winter or autumn. It is permanent. And the more it is unaddressed, the more it becomes structural. It means concerning everything, whatever environment, whatever economy, and whatever politics. So we need to address it, especially, and this is the latest paper we published yesterday, there is a rush for gold, especially the last 3 years. And increasingly, the gold is helping officially the huge amount or number of youth unemployed. When you get a gram or 5 grams of gold, it feeds you for a month and so on. But it is helping also terrorism. They may control it. They provide the equipment. They provide the destructive mercurium. Mercurium to separate gold from rock, you have to put mercurium, and it never disappears. So we have a number of concerns, but there are international priorities, which is normal in life. And a seminar like this, under your chairmanship, UNITAR and others, should be helpful, and we have to see how to organize. You have addressed the fundamental problem, and you should keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for these kind words. Before giving...
But by conviction, really, it is not to be kind, but really by conviction, because we need this level and kind of discussion to reach those who decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. Before I give the floor again to the director of UNITAR Division for Peace, I'm thanking all of you for being with us. Grazie mille to Mr. Lobasso. Hartelijk bedankt, mevrouw, voor uw woorden. Ja. And thank you to you, Mr. Fomba. And sir, thank you so much also for sharing all your expertise from the Center for S. So I now give the floor to Mr. Evariste.
Thank you. I have the impression that the time had been too short, simply because the distinguished panelists have done an excellent job. Our moderator had done a fantastic job. And the subject was very so interesting that I wish we could continue and learn more and more on the Sahel region. Very briefly, I want to share with you the instability in the Sahel region is a concern to all of us. Some may think they are too far away from the troubles in the Sahel, but there will be no development, no stability, no sustainability, no achieving the SDGs in the rest part of Africa. There will be no solution for migration, the northern part being the Arab countries, the northern part of Africa, and Europe. And therefore, I will conclude saying it's an imperative to everyone to take the subject seriously and to put together all efforts to promote peace and stability in the Sahel. It goes for the interest not only for Sahelian, but for all of us, European, African, name it, I indirectly or to a certain extent, the rest of the world. I will not close my remarks without really sincerely thanking the panelists. You have done a fantastic job once again. Without thanking Kathleen, thank you. It was a pleasure having you again with us. And be assured you are the best. You'll always be with us whenever we have an event. And to participants, thank you very much. Although we do not have enough time to allow you also to ask questions, I guess in one way or another, you could put your questions to our distinguished panelists, to our friends, Ambassador Ahmedou. So I'm sure they will be able, and our friend Fomba, I'm sure, be able to answer to some of the questions or provide some feedback to participants who may be interested to deepen some these subjects. Finally, I would say I will thank the organizers, my colleague from UNITAR, for putting together this event. It hasn't been an easy process, but here we are. It went very well. And I wish to thank you for those Mandine, Isaro, and Dennis. And behind this team, other colleagues who contributed in one way or another. So let me close this event by inviting a musical performance by the group called Etrandolaire, or Star of the Air, from the mountainous northern Niger. The group is now touring in the United States and soon in Europe to bring their own perspective and musician from the Sahel, and they pay tribute to the dynamic artistic life in the Agadez. Thank you.
Nous sommes étrangers de l'Aïr, venus du Niger, Agadez, le quartier Abala, Agadez. Nous jouons de la musique touareg. Nous sommes des frères, c'est un groupe de frères. On joue la musique, on est toujours à Agadez, on joue à Agadez. Et la musique, ça a commencé, la musique, c'était nos grands frères qui jouaient. Nous, on est là, on les suit. Bon, après quelques années, ils ont abandonné et nous, on a pris les relèves. C'est ça qui nous a amenés aujourd'hui à participer à beaucoup de mariages, jouer dans des mariages, continuer dans les groupes, continuer toujours à garder les groupes. Nous allons un peu parler sur les conséquences de notre vie, sur les conséquences de l'insécurité sur notre vie, dans le Sahel. Et la première chose, il y a les pertes des routes, il y a les problèmes de déplacement, et il y a au niveau des concerts, parfois il n'y a pas beaucoup de public. Au niveau de l'éducation aussi. Et ça bloque aussi, l'insécurité bloque aussi l'éducation de nos enfants, parce que les villages tout autour, et la ville, ils ont moins de sécurité. Et ça bloque l'éducation des enfants, la fermeture des hôtels, des dispensaires parce que les agents ils ont peur de se déplacer parce qu'avec l'insécurité. Et il y a le manque de tourisme, le tourisme qui a cessé parce que des fois il y a des tourismes qui assistent les pays et il y a beaucoup de forgerons qui vont quand ils viennent, il y a des chauffeurs quand ils veulent sortir visiter les montagnes ou les montagnes de l'Aïr, il y a des chauffeurs qui comprennent et aussi ils gagnent quelque chose. Il y a des cuisiniers. Bon. Et l'insécurité a tout bloqué cela. Voilà. Bon, étant de l'Aïr joue aussi dans des mariages. La plupart de la musique, c'est de jouer dans des mariages où tous les mondes sont réunis en partageant la joie, les femmes, les enfants, les vieilles, les gens, avec la danse là, avec la musique là qui chauffe les lieux, les gens oublient certains problèmes de l'insécurité. Donc ça leur fait oublier les problèmes de l'insécurité. Au moins au cours de ces mariages, quand on joue, les gens viennent danser, tout le monde vient danser, les enfants, tout le monde vient danser. Donc ça leur fait, ça fait oublier d'autres problèmes de l'insécurité. Ouais. Joue aussi dans ces mariages pour au moins contribuer à faire oublier les gens de certains problèmes de l'insécurité. Bon, l'artiste joue parfois sur des thèmes, beaucoup de thèmes, et on joue aussi sur la paix à travers, en passant des messages. On passe des messages aux gens, des messages de sensibilisation sur la paix. Les citoyens doivent aider l'autorité à mieux retrouver la paix dans la région.
Oui, notre musique aussi, elle parle beaucoup sur la paix. On a beaucoup de chansons qu'on a fait sur la paix, spécialement sur la paix. Et il y a des messages qui passent. Dans les autres morceaux, il y a des morceaux sur la vie, l'amitié, l'amour, l'éducation, la femme, par exemple.
Et aussi, on parle la paix, on chante aussi sur la paix entre les ethnies, parce qu'il y a des ethnies qui ont des problèmes entre elles. Par exemple, quand tu prends l'exemple des Toubous et des Touaregs, des fois ils ont des problèmes entre eux. Et nous, on fait un chant et en passant un message où les gens doivent être unis, quoi. Doivent se comprendre, doivent faire un consensus parce que les gens du pays, sans la paix, il n'y a pas de développement. Les gens du pays doivent se réunir pour que la paix règne. Parce que les conflits entre les ethnies, c'est aussi, ça bloque aussi parce que quand entre vous, il n'y a pas de consensus, là aussi, l'insécurité va beaucoup jouer sur vous. Parce qu'il y aura toujours des problèmes entre vous-même. À plus forte raison, des problèmes qui viennent d'ailleurs, en dehors du pays.
Mais s'il y a la paix, donc c'est bon. C'est pour cela qu'on a chanté pour la paix, pour passer les messages.
À chaque
de
fois,
toujours chercher la paix, parce que sans la paix, il n'y a rien.
il n'y a pas de développement. Ça bloque. Ça bloque tout. Bon, le rôle de l'artiste à travers la société, c'est de passer des messages, faire des sensibilisations sur la paix. Les gens, ils doivent se mettre en tête que c'est la paix. Sans la paix, il n'y a pas de développement. Donc, c'est à travers ça, c'est les messages qu'on peut passer en tant qu'artiste. C'est les messages que les gens sachent que sans la paix, il n'y a pas de développement. Parce que la paix, l'insécurité, quand il n'y a pas la paix, l'insécurité, ça bloque partout. Donc, nous, les messages qu'on passe, c'est à travers sensibiliser les gens à mettre en tête que sans la paix, il n'y a pas de développement.
Et le rôle même d'être ou bien de l'art, en fait, de l'art de musique même, c'est la sensibilisation. De passer les messages, c'est de parler, c'est d'aider, c'est de passer les messages. Tout ce qui est bon, c'est dans l'art, c'est l'art, son rôle, c'est de passer tout ce qui est bon, ce qui va amener un développement ou bien quelque chose de bon, ou bien un changement, ou bien une solution, ou bien un message, ou bien quelque chose qui est bon. C'est ça le rôle de l'art musical. Et être en aussi.
جيتنا نايتما يا ست الدين الخير الخير جيتنا نايتما على خير على خير النور نديني 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 على خير تجيت نديني غير تمدار خير تجيت نديني على خير تجيت نديني غير تمدار خير تجيت نديني يفعل الخير مجلا دغ الدنيا يفعل الخير تم دركة كوارث النايرة تم دركة كوارث النايرة أغراوات لمنك سفوسينا غايت ما يفعل السار جدتنا الدنيا غرد مدار تم دركة كوارث النايرة تم دركة كوارث النايرة أغراوات لمنك سفوسينا Je chante pour la femme, 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 je chante pour la femme. La femme est le berceau de l'humanité. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. La femme est le berceau de l'humanité. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. La femme est le berceau de bonheur immense. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. La femme est le berceau de bonheur immense. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. Je t'aime au fond du cœur pour un monde meilleur. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. Je t'aime au fond du cœur pour un monde meilleur. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. Scolarisons toutes les jeunes filles. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. Pour leur garantir un avenir meilleur. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. Respectons la femme c'est notre mère. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme. Respectons la femme c'est notre mère. Je chante pour la femme, je chante pour la femme.
Hello, everyone that is still here. Don't know if anyone can see me. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much to everyone who stayed. The event has officially closed. And thank you so much.
No. You guys did your job. I mean, as much as possible. But I mean, it's good to know.
Thank you, Liliana, and the entire team for your wonderful help. I don't know if you can hear me.
Thank you, Sarah. The event was great.
Thank you so much. Let me stop there. Okay. Thank you so much, Liliana, and to the team. Thank you so much, Fabrizio. Yes, thank you. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the week. And